My name's Liz Bowles and I'm one of the Oxford Farming Conference directors. Now, I know that you're all, we're all becoming remarkably familiar with Zoom, but just a brief reminder, if you could keep your microphones on mute unless you're speaking. If you've got any questions, then please post them in the chat. This session is being recorded and will be available via the Oxford Farming Conference website after the event. The full Fringe programme today and the conference running from the 4th to the 6th of January wouldn't be possible without our partners and sponsors. So our thanks go to all of them, and you can see them here behind me on the board, and in particular to our headline sponsor, Trinity Natural Capital Group. Now, I won't keep you waiting any longer for our next Fringe of the Day, which is hosted by Fera. And I must admit, I'm really looking forward to this. So and thank you for your continued support of Oxford Farming Conference, and over to you, Fera. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining Fera's session at the Oxford Farming Fringe. My name is Jess Barker. I'm the Business Development Manager for Fera's new insect research facility. A little bit about Fera. We're a science research facility based just outside of York, and we cover everything from farm to fork. And increasingly, we've become more interested in what happens to your food after it leaves your plate and becomes food waste. We're looking into how insects can upcycle that food waste and turn it into higher value products, such as protein. That's a process called insect bioconversion, and that's what we're going to be exploring in this session today. So the chair for our session today is Paul Temple, farmer himself, and we're going to hear about insect bioconversion from two very different perspectives, from Maureen Wakefield, who's a scientist at Fera, and from Tom Warnham, who's a poultry farmer. So two very different perspectives. And at the end of the session, we'll bring both of those two perspectives back to the table for a question and answer session. Before I hand over to Paul, who's our chair, whenever I do these things, I always like to remind ourselves, why is it that we're interested in this area? Why are we doing all of this? So this is around meeting the global demand for protein. We all know that we're going to have to be producing more protein to meet that global demand. But also we know that we will need to be producing more domestic protein in order to insulate ourselves from some of the global commodity shocks. This is also about adding value to waste. We know that waste has value, and this is around capturing that value and potentially diversifying farm income by creating a new revenue stream. This is also around sustainability. We've heard a lot about that in the previous sessions today. And our area of interest is how can we use innovation to produce more food whilst using less resources? So that's our focus, that's our area. Enough from me. I hope you really enjoy the session. And we'd also like to continue the dialogue. We can offer some perspectives on insect bioconversion today, but we'd really like to continue the conversation. So there's a survey on the screen. Please scan the code to share your views. And I'll pop a link into the chat shortly where you can signal that you'd like to have a conversation with us directly. So without further ado, I'll pass over to our chair, Paul Temple.
Okay, well, thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this session sponsored by Fera. I find it absolutely brilliant that these Fringe sessions are actually globally accessible. You can reach them at any point in the world. My name is Paul Temple. I'm a mixed farmer from Yorkshire. I'm actually not too far away from Fera, and I am being typically constantly challenged by so many new problems, protein sourcing being one of them. So this session to me is particularly relevant. As was mentioned, and I will continue to do it, there is a survey for you to participate, and questions can be asked in the box available as well. So we'll pick those up later. So can insect bioconversion help provide feed security and lower carbon footprint amid a growing demand for protein? Well, we shall soon find out. This is a really exciting science. It's being carried out in the UK, and the challenge will always be to take it from the lab to the farmer and ultimately onto the consumer. So our first speaker is Maureen Wakefield, who's going to outline what is insect bioconversion. It's over to you, Maureen, and if you can quickly outline your own background.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to the Oxford Farming Conference for the opportunity to present on this topic today. So I'm Maureen Wakefield. I'm a principal scientist at Fera, responsible for entomology. And I've been working now on research and development projects in this area for about 10 years, primarily looking at different fly species. And in this session today, I just briefly want to introduce you into the topic of insect bioconversion, just to explain what are the principles behind insect bioconversion, what the process involves and the products that can be derived from the process, and to talk a little bit about what the research has shown us to date, and also touching on what research needs to be done for the future and the applications for this. So firstly, very briefly, why are we looking at insects? So you may be aware that actually insects are a very good source of protein, and depending on the species of insect, they can be up to 60% protein on a dry matter basis. But importantly, the insects also contain other valuable nutrients, such as the fats. And again, dependent on the species, the fat content of the insects can be up to 60%. It's been shown in various trials with various different farmed animals that insect protein is very digestible, and it can actually be more digestible than some of the plant-based proteins. But what is of particular interest in this whole process is that some of these species of insect are very, very good at reducing organic waste into their biomass, so they can make a very valuable contribution to the circular economy and to nutrient recycling. In addition to the protein and the fats that can be derived from the insects, we can also derive other more novel products, such as chitin, which actually forms part of the skin, the outer surface of the insects, and that can be converted into chitosan, which has a variety of industrial uses, and also antimicrobial peptides and the frass from the insects. And I'll show this in a bit more detail on the next slide. And so here we have a schematic of what the insect bioconversion process entails. So we are taking an organic substrate, which can be anything from animal manures through to vegetable waste, catering waste, etc. And the substrate that you can use for this process is very much at the moment subject to regulations. So at the moment, within the UK and the EU, we are only able to use plant and vegetable derived substrates for the insects. So using manures or catering waste for anything that's going into the food or feed chain is not currently permitted. So we can take these substrates, we then use these for the insects to develop, and then take those insects, we can extract and process the oils, the proteins, and the novel products. And what we are left with at the end is a mixture of the uneaten substrate, some of the shed skins from the insect larvae as they have developed, and the insect excrement as they have fed, which collectively is referred to as the insect frass. And this frass can form a very valuable organic fertiliser. So what insect species have we been focusing on for this application? Well, when it comes to looking at protein for animal feed, most of the research has been conducted on 3 key species: the black soldier fly, Hermetia illucens, the housefly, Musca domestica, and a beetle species, the yellow mealworm, Tenebrio molitor. Presently, it's the black soldier fly and the yellow mealworm where most of the research focus is, and also where most commercial focus is in terms of companies that are now commercially producing these insects and the protein meal from them. So what type of research has been conducted globally in this area, and what are the key findings from that research? Well, firstly, it's been demonstrated that the inclusion of insect protein in feed, which has been studied now for poultry, fish, and also some pet species, in particular dogs. And it has been shown that the inclusion of insect protein can have positive effects on the animals, not only in terms of their nutrition and nutritional profile of the meal, but there is also now some evidence of health benefits to the animals, in particular in poultry. Some of the results around this area aren't fully conclusive, and more research is required for this. But it is interesting to see how the insect protein can affect, for example, the gut microbiome, which may bring about some health benefits. The safety of insect-derived products, so the fats and the oils, has been studied. And it's been shown that the safety of these products and any risks associated with these are very much dependent on the substrate that is used to feed the insects. But generally, the safety and the risk profile is very good, although it has been demonstrated that you can get bioaccumulation of some heavy metals in the insect larvae if the substrate does contain levels of these. The environmental impact of insect protein production is also being researched. And again, it's been demonstrated that this is also very dependent on the substrate that is used for the insects. More recently, aside from the research that's been conducted on the insect protein and the oils, there's more research being conducted on the frass as a fertiliser. So it has been demonstrated that the frass has good nutritional properties in terms of plant growth, but it's now being recognised that the frass may have additional beneficial properties beyond purely plant nutrition, and in that it may also have some biostimulant and biopesticidal properties. Finally, some non-feed applications for the insect bioconversion process are being researched. In particular, looking at insect bioconversion as a way of processing waste streams such as animal manures and slurries. So in this case, the insect-derived products would not go into the food or feed chain, but it could well be a very good process and technique for reducing large volumes of these types of waste stream. So there's a lot of research that has been done, but there's also a lot of research still to do. So we still need to get a far better understanding of the nutritional requirements for the insects themselves and the substrates that they will feed on. There's also research that's being conducted on the genetics of the insects that are being used to see if we can improve the genetics for those insects. The safety and quality of the products still requires investigation, as does that environmental impact. And in terms of some of the key projects and the research that Fera has been conducted, as I mentioned earlier, I've been involved in this research for nearly 10 years now, starting with an Innovate UK funded project, as was then, which was led by AB Agri, looking at the potential of insect protein for poultry feed. This was followed by an EU-funded project, ProteInsect, which was led by and coordinated by Fera, involving countries across the EU and also in Africa and China. And that project actually produced quite a lot of the safety data about the products from insect bioconversion, which was given to EFSA to help them inform about the safety profile of insects protein for feed. And on the back of the paper published by EFSA, the regulations in the EU were changed in 2017 to permit the feeding of insect protein in aquaculture. Fera has also led a working group, the Insect Biomass Working Group in the UK, to look at the risks and opportunities and challenges for the insect bioconversion industry in the UK. And on the back of that, 2 white papers were published. And more recently in the European Union, the regulations were changed again, so that the inclusion of insect protein is now permitted in feed for poultry and pigs. So I've mentioned that there's still a lot of research to be done. And so on that basis, Fera has recently made an investment in a new Fera insect research unit, which was officially opened in this August, which now permits us to scale up our research into insect bioconversion, to go to sort of pilot scale trials, which are more appropriate and applicable to industry, but which is also available to government and to companies both nationally and internationally to conduct the research. And this video just shows a short animation of our new facility. So I hope that's given you a useful introduction into insect bioconversion and some of the work that's been conducted by Fera. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Maureen. Just one quick question. How did you come to build this capacity within Fera? You know, what's the background that took you into this?
Well, as I mentioned, we've been doing research in this area for quite some time now and have led some of the big projects, such as the EU protein insect projects. Really, we just wanted to be able to go from that lab scale to more of a pilot scale that would be more directly applicable for industry. But also that, for example, government could use to conduct some studies to provide evidence for the safety of insect proteins. So, for example, Fera has recently been successful in gaining a project from the Food Standards Agency, where we are currently looking at substrates that are not currently permitted for rearing of the insect larvae, and then looking at the safety of the insects reared on those substrates to provide evidence that perhaps in the future could lead to a broader range of substrates being permitted to be fed to the insects.
Yeah. No, right. Well, and the FSA element is really important. We'll come back to that in questions. Right. We'll move on to our next speaker, so we keep up on our time. Tom, he's our second speaker. He's an experienced NFU representative, along with being a poultry farmer. So, Tom, over to you.
Yeah, thank you ever so much indeed, Paul, for the introduction. As you said, Paul, I am a poultry producer and arable farmer in Hertfordshire, and I've had the privilege of representing the poultry sector for the NFU. And for the past 6 years, I've been a farmer representative on the Insect Industry UK Development Group. That's an assortment of companies producing all things insect, entomologists, and associated recycling companies seeking to promote the insect sector. Whether presented at conferences, written about in industry journals, or discussed between peers, insects are to poultry what hydrogen is to propulsion, full of potential, but not commercialized. Where is the industry positioned as from a farmer's perspective? Well, poultry and aquaculture are the go-to sectors as early adopters due to the high costs of insects. There are two systems of approach: containerized systems or centralized production. A few egg producers are feeding maggots to chickens. Currently, Morrisons are proudly promoting their net zero egg as a result. At scale, I'm not aware of any insects being fed on poultry due to legislation challenges, as Maureen has alluded to. The impact agriculture has on the climate is comprehensively documented. Poultry feed is one part of the discussion, offering multiple options to incorporate future changes. Poultry diets require protein, currently soya, for its reliable and stable properties, despite being imported from Brazil or America. Research into alternative proteins provides solutions that farmers wouldn't have the option to explore. But insects must compete with homegrown pulses and processed animal protein, PAP, also known as, in order for it to succeed. Poultry production is known for its efficiency in converting feed into eggs and protein. Maintaining consistent feed quality is imperative for the sector to remain competitive. Not only would the supply of insects need to be consistent, but so would the availability of a substrate. I have assumed that the poultry farmer would be producing the insects to supplement the diet. Identifying a reliable supply of substrate to feed the insect is key. Ideally, the substrate would be repurposed in products destined for landfill, as the industry looks to address the food waste hierarchy conundrum. But returning to my first observation, insects have been discussed for many years, and I sense a degree of apathy. Either the concept is good enough that success should be driven by industry enthusiasm, or there needs to be government intervention in order to inspire growth of this sector. Now, necessity is the mother of invention, and this image identifies many reasons for change. There were bug businesses creating success in other countries, while the UK is still at the concept stage of the journey into insects. UK agriculture is developing knowledge because of the work currently being done at universities and research centres. Farmers are consistently seeking ways to improve their business. And the war in Ukraine has highlighted the fragility of supply chains and the speed in which food inflation can be stimulated. Farmers are responsible for producing food to maintain a degree of food security. If there is capacity to increase protein at home, while simultaneously addressing food waste and contributing to the circular economy, such policy possibilities should be explored. For example, using the byproduct of insect substrate as an organic fertiliser in arable production. So, how can farmers take this industry from the lab and monetize it? Currently, there are egg farms produced for Morrisons that feed insects. We have heard of the benefits insects bring to the birds and how by taking a substrate of low or zero value, there is the ability to create a valuable protein. Until recently, because farming is one of the benefactors of insect production, I naturally assumed the users would also be the producers. But in the instance of a modular system, this could be the case. However, there are alternatives to site-specific production sites. On-farm production requires planning. Take a look at this farm. Modern, well laid out, but no insect facility as yet. Installing a modular system retrospectively is possible. One of my first images shows such an installation, but designing and building in capacity for such a facility should be considered at every new build concept. Gaining planning for poultry units is challenging. The integration of such a project could benefit future planning applications as district councils seek to establish how they develop climate change and sustainability partnerships. I know that to be true in Hertfordshire, where I live. Making provisions for power, water, and site position is essential for any new design. Putting up concrete to route cables is timely, costly, and heartbreaking. And biosecurity must also be built into any project. If the larger industrialized systems were to be developed, gaining the support of the feed mills will be essential. I understand feed mills lack capacity for new ingredients. There just isn't the space on site to take this new product. If large volumes of insects are to be created, there needs to be the market in which to supply. And there are two further areas where insects could benefit business: Scope 3 emissions and green finance. Scope 3 are emissions that are not produced by a company, but by those that are indirectly responsible in the supply of goods to that company. Therefore, would it be unreasonable for retailers to seek examples of how farmers are reducing their emissions if they wish to supply the retailer? Insects could remedy this question. And secondly, the availability of green finance. The cost of debt is far greater for projects that don't beat the industry standards for energy use. Biomass conversion is built upon reducing climate impact. To conclude, the benefits to society extend beyond the farm gate, but the rewards of being an early adopter of this sector seem limited. If, however, there were the opportunity for collaboration between farmer and business to be introduced, now would be the time to create those relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I think we now have a video to just follow on.
Today's been a fantastic opportunity to come and see the really groundbreaking research into insect protein, which farmers are really interested in because we can see real applications in feeding both pigs and poultry and other species. We're very reliant on soya at the moment. There's a feed security point here, but also there's a fantastic opportunity around being able to reduce the carbon footprint. Farmers are thinking quite carefully about how they can move to more regenerative practices, how they can lower their carbon footprint. And certainly looking at alternative feeds is one way in which they can do that. There is a substantial greenhouse gas footprint attached to some imported feeds like soya. So some of the alternative feeds that we're looking at today, including insect protein, could provide some of those routes through. Then hopefully we can reduce the overall environmental footprint of our production.
Okay, well, that neatly leads us on to some questions. I've got a number of questions from in front of me that were given to me already, but we have some in the chat box, so we'll go straight onto those. We've got, first of all, from Rachel Davis, do you foresee any opportunities for ruminant agriculture? Maureen, I presume that one will be to you.
Yes, thank you. So principally, the research that's been done to date has been, as I mentioned, conducted for monogastric species and for fish. I am aware of some research that's currently being done in the US, looking at inclusion in ruminant nutrition. But to date, really, the focus has been on monogastrics and fish.
Yeah. And there's another question whilst you're on the roster, Maureen, from Wanda Smith, or to Tom as well. Can you say anything more about the impact on gut microbiome of use of insect protein when fed to farmed livestock? You mentioned the qualities of fats and proteins, but beyond that.
So there is evidence that the microbiome is altered when insect protein is fed, and that there is an increase in the sort of good gut bacteria and a decrease in other bacteria that may be more harmful to animals. Again, as I mentioned, the research on this isn't conclusive and will sort of depend on the the animal species that you're looking at, and also the inclusion levels of the insect protein in the feeds. And this is an area where much more research is needed to have a conclusive opinion. So some studies have shown sort of neutral effects on the animals, and some have shown beneficial.
And Thomas, I mean, you obviously, because you're part of the group that you've been in, aware of it being fed to chickens. From an actual chicken producer's perspective, are they seeing any difference when they switch from soya into these forms of protein?
I think the one of the main things that, so I'm very lucky where I live here, because there's a company, a small startup company, actually one of their pictures was on my slides, and they're literally 8 miles down the road. So I've got a nice little relationship with them. And they've also come along and promoted what they're doing at the NFU. And they have a video that shows the chickens which have been fed on these insects. And the insects, the chickens absolutely love these insects. You know, they just flock to them like you would see a sheep following the farmer around the field when they're putting out the stubble turnips, whatever, it really excites them and gets them to behave in their natural way, foraging and digging amongst the in the floor between the pebbles, whatever's around the house. Is there any benefit to the food conversion? I mean, as I understand at the moment, the levels of inclusion are relatively small, and it's essentially just a behavioural addition to the bird's diet. But as Maureen said, it's got all the qualities that's required, and all I ever hear is really, positive stories about how it has succeeded in these trial farms.
And do I mean, you alluded to it by showing us obviously the modern buildings. Do you think we're trying to think this feeding mechanism through what's called current best practice or the most efficient practice? And do you think we should maybe rethink how this production would fit alongside the production in the poultry sector that might fit better with it?
Yeah, great point, Paul, because at the moment, relatively small numbers and quite novel, and with really positive proven results, but it does require somebody to go out and manually put those maggots out for the chickens. But to do that commercially, agriculture really struggles to get people into the industry. It's got to kind of be attractive. It's got to be easy to do. I mentioned biosecurity. If you've got and this is why I was talking about the planning, the infrastructure. If you've got a facility on site where you're producing the insects and then you're taking those insects to then feed to the chickens in its environment, you're walking across a yard where there might be, avian influenza, which is the major concern at the moment. You want to reduce any risk of disease incursion. So that's why I wonder whether the large scale, where it's incorporated, the insects is incorporated into the diet, actually has the result. But then you don't see the behavioural change of the bird that you would do when the bird's rooting around for the maggots. So that's why I think those two principles are really important. If you're going for the bespoke market, your organic, your top end market, something that the UK is really good at doing, and then then that opens up export markets, then I can really see the advantage to that, because then you'll pay a premium for the product, so you'll be able to encourage the stockman to put the bugs out manually. But on a commercial level, it's not, I can't see the attractiveness. So discussions like this are great. I don't see Maureen that often, and maybe it's something she's considered, but maybe it's something not. And the pragmatism of actually putting insects into the poultry diet has got to be considered.
And Maureen, flipping this back to you in the same question, have you allowed your mind to run forward to how you think the producer model might fit with this supply of protein and feed?
I think that depending on the scenarios, there are different models that can be used, and I think this will also depend where globally you are using them. So I think obviously there are centralized facilities now exist in the EU and North America, and really because the quality of the protein and the insect-derived products is so dependent on the substrate, it's really important that you have a sort of consistent supply of that substrate that's going in to produce a very high quality and known composition for that protein. So certainly in that case, perhaps the centralized facilities are a very good model. If we're thinking more globally, then if you're thinking of perhaps smallholder farmers in Africa, then certainly very local production units are applicable. And sort of moving on and thinking perhaps in the future, perhaps for poultry farms, etc., perhaps it would be insect bioconversion to actually reduce waste, perhaps not on poultry farms where perhaps the waste, poultry manure has got an application to land anyway, but perhaps if we're looking at pig or cattle slurries, So not with the products not going into the food or feed chain, but purely as a waste conversion mechanism.
Well, Thomas, I mean, that links into the question from Andrew Swift that I don't know if you can see, which is basically talking about, DEFRA's announced major financial assistance for facilities for slurry storage. But should they be thinking out of the box, 1-2 years forward as to how they can incentivize investment rather than just storing these wastes on farm, actually using these wastes on farm?
I don't quite know how to answer that. You obviously, this is a new concept. My question was, my concern was, at the moment, I've been thinking about farmers producing the bugs. May well be just specific industries or individuals who are producing the bugs. Don't forget, in order to get the substrate onto a farm, you need to get transportation and road networks. So it may be that a farmer happens to have good access to an A road, and I mean that would be ideal, because then you could bring on, articulated lorries to get rid of waste. I mean, certainly, and there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't do this in the city centre. So, it's going to, this because it's relatively new, it's going to take some real blue sky thinking, I think, to incentivize. I think we've heard it's a great idea. It's just monetizing it now. Yeah,
I'd love to be in the planning meeting for putting a fly farm in the middle of a city. That would be really entertaining. There's an interesting question from May Smith that's come into the box. You've mentioned research into feeding insects non-permitted substances. Do you have concerns that at farm level people could start feeding them anything? Do we need to have regulation that keeps up with the substrates as well as the actual feeding?
Should I take that just quickly? Because I think Maureen can give a more comprehensive answer, because Rebecca's asked a fairly similar question. My view as a farmer is that let's just say I build an insect farm. My view is always, I will invest high if I get a good return. If there's no return, then I'll invest low and I will cut corners. To me, financial viability is key. And if I decide to give poor products as a substrate, I'm going to have to anticipate a poor result, and I'm just going to be out of business. I think as the UK, we should be world leaders in this, and we should lead by example. I'm sure there would be rogues out there, but if you've got salmonella in your eggs or in your meat, you are not getting, because we do salmonella tests for both meat and eggs. And if you've got that, your product's not going to market. So you're losing out twice. You've got to pay for your substrate, and then you've got to pay for disposal of your product. So you're a loser.
And Maureen, would you like to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think obviously the regulations are there for a reason, and you have to abide by those regulations. But obviously, the more research that we do and the more robust scientific evidence that we can present, then obviously there is scope for looking at some of those regulations again.
I've just on regulation. I have a question that came in regard to Food Standards Agency and the regulatory approach. So obviously, we've been talking about producing the product and feeding the product. Do you think the regulatory process keeps up in terms of that product actually meeting the consumer at some point? And that's a question to both of you. I'll start with Maureen.
So absolutely, consumer perceptions and consumer attitude to these more novel products is very key. So again, that's another area that is being researched at the moment as to what consumer attitude is towards insect protein and towards farmed animals that have been reared on insect protein. So there is a sort of lot of social science going on in this area as well. And obviously a lot of education. And again, why we sort of do events such as this, just so that people understand the concept better and have a good idea of what's happening. And just bearing in mind that a lot of the animals that we're looking to feed the insect protein to, such as poultry and fish, insects are a part of their natural diet. I think that's quite important to remember.
Thomas.
Yeah, spot on, Maureen. I mean, I recall, on our meeting when we first started, we had Tesco's and Morrison's, and they did a bit of research into customer feedback, and it was fairly positive. And as you rightly say, these birds are omnivores. At the moment, there is no animal protein in any of the diets, so why it wouldn't be encouraged back in is beyond me, really.
I mean, Serena's asked a question, partially already covered, Tom. But what would incentivize the increase or implementation and uptake of this route of feed? Now, I mean, whilst you're thinking about that, Thomas, this is it sort of leads on from a theme that's come out of a few of these fringe sessions, that if we are to talk about our carbon footprints, our impact, and how we can use waste efficiently, this, to my mind, is why this is so exciting. And I do tend to think we have to have a sense of ambition out there, and we also have to look at what's actually happening elsewhere in the world. And I know for a fact that in the US they are attempting to scale this up on a level that we can't quite imagine. And I think it's a sense of ambition that we actually need in this particular area, and the willingness for government to incentivize the work that Maureen and others do alongside the farming fraternity, so we can make the most of this opportunity. Thomas, have you had a chance to work out how you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so Serena, I think Maureen and both Maureen have touched on the need to change regulation to allow insects to be incorporated into a diet. You can feed insects, but you can't blend it into a compound feed, and that is how chickens are essentially fed. So that simple change in legislation, which I think as our group, Maureen, we've been talking about, well, ever since I've been involved, and when Andrew Swift set it up probably 6-7 years ago, nothing's changed there. And then how would it be incentivized on the farm? Well, the farmer, and if you're at the bespoke level, you may want that as a point of difference. So if you're doing, free range turkeys, geese, not capons, but big chickens now, that would be a point of difference. At a commercial level, I think that's where you've got to incentivize the feed industries to have it as part of the diet, because I don't believe it's got to be clear. It's got to be clean, and it's got to be easily workable for the employees. I mean, it's all very good, if you're working in an industry, in a laboratory, and you're getting your hands covered in maggots, for an hour a day, and then you just wash them and you go home. But if you're as a farmer, and you've got to do that every single day, you're not going to incentivize anybody to go into that business, are you? It's got to be kept clean and cool. And so somebody on here might be an engineer and have some wicked way of getting the bugs from the container or whatever into the shed.
And Maureen, you actually, in your timeline, you alluded to the partnerships you've had over that timeline. Where do you see us in relation to other countries, and are you yourself working with other countries at the moment?
Yes, so we do have projects internationally in this area. In terms of timelines, obviously the regulations changed again within the EU last year, as Tom's mentioned as well, to enable the feeding of insect protein to pigs and poultry. Currently, that's still not permitted in the UK, so we will have to see if that changes in the near future. And really just looking at how the research base can sort of provide more evidence of the benefits of using this technology, both in terms of the sustainability and the uses for some of the products as well. I think some of the research that's currently being conducted on the frass, for example, where we're showing sort of, where it's being demonstrated that there may be biostimulant or biopesticidal properties of the frass is really interesting and could open up a whole new avenue in the near future.
And you mentioned, oh, sorry, Thomas, go on.
Yeah, could I just pick up on what Andrew was saying to follow on from Serena's point? He's made it in the it made the point in the questions about the carrot and the stick. I mean, I had alluded to scope 3 emissions, so the accountability for farmers to supply the food chain. That may well also be a bit of a stick, I suppose. And it has been spoken about. Dieter Helm has spoken about having a carbon tax on products coming into the UK, hasn't he? That may well be an added stick. I mean, it does seem to me like there are more sticks than there are carrots, but maybe that's just in the wording.
Yeah. Maureen, there is obviously potential in this. Are you running any economic models alongside your work? And I say that because if you took us back 12 months ago, before we'd had the situation in Ukraine and the rapid inflation that sort of kicked off, we're now looking at wheat that's touched up to 285 and oilseed rape that touched up to 900. Is the economic model fetching this back into being more commercial?
So certainly, yeah. I mean, the economics are very important. Again, that's why the substrate is quite important. So, understanding how much substrate you have to supply and the sort of insect volumes you get out, and subsequently the quality and composition of the insect-derived products. So we can sort of model the economics around the process. And I think an important thing to bear in mind is obviously as I've mentioned, the insect protein is being produced commercially. So it is a commercial proposition, not in the UK at the moment, but in the EU and North America, there are commercially operating companies. And I think as this industry scales up, then obviously the costs of the products will come down.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to draw this to a close now. I have several other questions that I would like to ask, but we've just run out of time. Maureen, keep up the fantastic work. And Thomas, it's really important that the farmers are working alongside this kind of research. You can see that scan there. Make sure you scan it and take part in this conversation. And that's it. Thanks for this fringe session. Thank you very much, Fera, for sponsoring it. And I think we're back to the OFC now.
We are indeed, Paul. Thank you ever so much, Paul, Tom and Maureen. That really was a very thought-provoking session. And I could hear through the conversation and the questions, the real interest that there is in this topic, and perhaps a little bit of frustration that we're not able to move a bit faster in the UK than perhaps some other countries in Europe. And I'm sure all of the people watching will agree that that was a brilliant session with plenty of food for thought. And as we count down to the conference in January, which is entitled Farming a New Future. A big thank you to Fera for your time today, and to all of you for joining us. Just a quick reminder that this session has been recorded and it will be available to watch back on demand in the next few days. And again, if you'd like to join us in January, we still have tickets to attend in person or online, and you can find them at www.ofc.org.uk. Our next fringe session, which starts at 3:30, is entitled Net Zero in Farming, Threat or Opportunity for the Sector, and it's hosted by Virgin Money. And again, it'll start at 3:30 p.m, so you've got time to go and make a cup of tea and find a biscuit. You'll need to click on the different Zoom link, which you can now find in the chat for this meeting or in any of your confirmatory emails that you will have received from us. And once again, thank you very much and look forward to seeing you in Oxford.